Good evening, everyone. We will get started in just a second. I'm going to let everyone get into the room and get connected. And then we will get started.
Right all the way to town without my phone.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Womack-Williams. I'm the State Education Issues Director for Texas A&T's Bridges Institute for Professional Development. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight, we have Sarah with United Against Human Trafficking in the Houston area, who is going to be doing a presentation for us on human trafficking so that you educators can understand the signs and the symptoms of those individuals who are being trafficked in the school system. So Sarah, I will turn it over to you for you to introduce yourself, and you should be able to take it from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jamie. Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Brewer, and I am an education coordinator with United Against Human Trafficking. We are based in the greater Houston area, and I have been involved in the anti-trafficking movement for about 12 years now. Professionally only since January, but I've been a part of this movement for a long time. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you about human trafficking, how you can recognize it, and what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. So a little bit about my organization, United Against Human Trafficking. As Jamie mentioned, we are based out of the Houston area. We educate the community about what human trafficking is and train frontline professionals such as, educators, as well as social service providers, healthcare providers, law enforcement, first responders, hospitality, about these specific industries and how they intersect with human trafficking and how your unique role, you're able to identify trafficking and react appropriately. We also lead a coalition of about 60 organizations known as the Houston Rescue and Restore Coalition. And this coalition is dedicated to the proactive, fighting of human trafficking in the greater Houston area. We raise awareness, we do education, we provide services to survivors, and identify what those gaps are so that we are addressing all aspects of human trafficking. We also try to prevent exploitation before it happens. So we chat with youth in schools, juvenile justice centers, group homes, and I'll talk more about our youth programs in a minute. We also do outreach to populations that have a higher risk of being exploited. So individuals experiencing houselessness, substance abuse, food insecurity, or job insecurity. We also are very grateful that we have a case manager. And so if and when we do get referrals of victims or survivors, we can connect them directly to our case manager that can make sure that they have all of the resources that they need. Diving a little bit further into our youth programs, we have the Not a Number curriculum from Love 146. And this is a 5-module curriculum. Each module is about an hour long. And it's basically a series of conversations with youth where we talk about things like healthy and unhealthy relationships, building confidence, what grooming looks like, how social media can be dangerous, to have really open and honest conversations that can help youth to increase their resiliency. We also have one-off workshops for students and parents where they can learn about what human trafficking is, what are the tactics that recruiters use, what are the community resources, and we can kind of tailor those presentations for specific audiences. We also have the Real Talk program. So this is geared more towards individuals that we know have experienced trauma. So we do this training at women's shelters, jails, juvenile justice centers, those kinds of places. And we have these really open and honest conversations about trauma, recovery, violence, all of these kinds of things. So we've done this for youth that are in juvenile justice centers, group foster homes, or even, sports teams that have had a suicide on the team. We also have opportunities for youth to volunteer or do special projects if they're really interested in doing a project that surrounds fighting human trafficking. So let's talk about human trafficking. So one of the great things about this being on Zoom is that I can see all of your lovely faces and I can ask you guys questions. So when I say human trafficking, what comes to mind? Are there any experiences that you want to share or thoughts that you have? If you want to take yourself off mute and let me know what you think. Or maybe it's just like way late in the day and you're like, just give us the information, lady, so we can all have dinner.
I was going to say the Fort Hood ring of trafficking, because I was from Fort Hood. So when I was in high school, that had happened once. And then recently another ring kind of came out of human trafficking from the Fort Hood area. So that was just something that I was aware of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I am not familiar with that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that trafficking ring?
Yeah, for sure. So it's actually based out of the military, military members. Yeah, we're trafficking other soldiers and also people like civilians. It was a huge story actually. And it's happened quite a few times in Fort Hood area. To where they've had superiors kind of trafficking their privates, women, men. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one of the reasons that I love having some interactivity in these presentations, because I learn things and I love learning, new things from people that live in these areas and have experiences and stories to share. Does anybody else want to share any experiences or thoughts about human trafficking? No? Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to look into that because I kind of heard things, but I don't think that I heard a direct story saying like we have evidence that this is trafficking. So I definitely want to look into that, and thank you for sharing it. So human trafficking is a business. There is a demand for free and cheap labor and services and for commercial sex. And on the supply side, there are people who are vulnerable, people who need to have emotional needs met, physical needs met. And as long as we have vulnerable people making up the supply and this demand for free and cheap labor and commercial sex on the demand side, we will continue to have human trafficking. It's the second largest criminal industry in the world after the drug trade, but it is the fastest growing criminal industry. And the reason for that is when it comes to drugs, they are manufactured, sold, used one time, but a human being, unfortunately, can be used, sold over and over again. And traffickers are also finding that it is low risk and high reward. We've talked to the DA's office and they've said that, if a trafficker gets pulled over with drugs in the car, they're for sure going to jail for a certain amount of time for however much drugs are in the car. But if they get pulled over with a 15-year-old kid in the car, and that 15-year-old believes that they are there by choice, then, they're not going to make an outcry to the police if that person gets pulled over. And it's really easy to explain away, oh, this is my kid, this is my cousin, this is my, significant other, or whatever the case may be. But at its core, of course, human rights is, or human trafficking is a human rights violation. We as people have a right to be free, to make decisions about our own lives, to have freedom of movement, to be safe. And human trafficking takes away those basic human rights. So let's look at the actual definition of human trafficking. Now, even though people have been exploiting other people for centuries, you know, even Christopher Columbus in his personal diaries gave very detailed accounts of how he trafficked Native people. The definition of human trafficking as we know it today has only been around since the year 2000. So in the year 2000, the United Nations passed 3 Palermo protocols to fight transnational crime. And one of these was the Protocol to Prevent and Suppress Trafficking in Persons. And the United States was the first country to heed the call from the United Nations and pass legislation clearly defining human trafficking and setting out provisions to fight it. So we did that by creating the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. The TVPA defines human trafficking as an action by a means for a purpose equals the crime of human trafficking. That action can include recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, advertising, or soliciting a person by a means of control. So a lot of times when we think about human trafficking, we think about somebody being followed in a Walmart parking lot by a mysterious van or getting kidnapped off the street. Maybe we think about the movie Taken. That's really in our collective imagination what we think of when we think of human trafficking. But the truth is, and hopefully this puts people's minds at ease, that usually traffickers use psychological manipulation to manipulate somebody into trafficking, and then they use force to maintain that control over an individual. So force can look like physical assault, sexual assault, isolation, starvation, kidnapping, strangulation, torture, or forced drug use. But fraud and coercion are what we most frequently see to initiate that control over somebody. Traffickers will date their victims. It's known as Romeo pimping. They will take their victims out on dates, buy them gifts, have them move in together, convince them that their friends and family don't care about them. And once the victim relies on that trafficker for their social needs, their physical needs, then the trafficker will turn around and say, well, if you care about me, then you will sell your body or sell drugs or do this job. And on the flip side of that, if you don't do what I say, then you're going to be beaten or I'm going to go after your family. And it can also look like a job offer that's really different from what was promised. So something that we see more frequently with young people is traveling sales crews. So traveling sales crews will present this job opportunity where no experience is necessary. Travel the world, make a lot of or travel the country, make a lot of friends, make a ton of money. And then once these young people are involved in this scheme, then they, don't ever know where they're going. They are not allowed to return home. We've heard reports of physical or sexual assault, wage theft. They don't see the wages that they were promised. And I even heard a story from a survivor who said that she was trapped in a traveling sales crew for over 10 years. So that's a very real thing that we're still seeing on a regular basis. And the third method of control is coercion. Sorry, I'm laughing because my kitten's like gearing up to try to jump on my lap. He's up from his nap. So coercion is the third method, and this can look like threats of harm to the person, threats of harm to their loved ones, threats of deportation, threats of abuse of the legal process, blackmail, or the taking of IDs. So something that a trafficker might say to a young person are, we know that unfortunately young people are taking inappropriate pictures or videos of themselves, and sending them to people that they think they can trust, right? We tell them not to, and we know that they're doing it anyway. But if a trafficker gets their hand on that material, then they'll say, you know, you better keep sending me these pictures, or, you know, you're going to do what I say and meet up with me tonight, or I'm going to send this material to your teachers, to your school, to your parents. And for us as adults with reasoning skills, we know, like, okay, well, it's better that somebody sees that picture than for, you know, somebody to get trafficked. But for a young person whose prefrontal cortex is not developed yet, that reasoning isn't developed yet, for them, they think that I did this to myself. This is my fault. I can't tell anybody what's going on. I just have to do what this person says. And on top of that, the trafficker might say, you know, and if you don't, you know, I'm going to harm your family. They'll groom their victims over a period of time where they learn about, you know, where do you live? Who is in your family? Where does your family work or go to school? You know, what do you care about? What are you insecure about? And then traffickers collect that knowledge under the guise of flirtation or friendship. And then when they're ready to exploit, they use all of that information that they gathered to prey on those vulnerabilities and insecurities. So action by a means for the purpose of sexual exploitation or labor exploitation. Sexual exploitation is when someone is exploited into performing a commercial sex act. So that sex act can include pornography, stripping, webcams, in addition to what we traditionally think of. And so that's in exchange for something of value. And something of value can include money or food, clothing, shelter, drugs, whatever someone deems valuable in the moment. And labor exploitation is a little bit harder to identify because it's really any violation of our labor rights. It can mean working too many hours without proper compensation, wage theft, working against your will, physical or sexual assault on the job, any of those. So if we can identify at least one action by a means for a purpose, then we have a case of human trafficking. An important exception to this rule is if somebody is under the age of 18, we don't need to prove force, fraud, or coercion if they are being sexually exploited. So this means that anytime anyone under 18 exchanges a sexual act for something of value, that minor is automatically a victim of a severe form of trafficking in persons. So if you have a 15-year-old kid who is sending inappropriate pictures or videos with adult content, which it's called child sex abuse material. We're not calling it child porn. You know, that's not okay. It's known as on that child sex abuse material. So if that child is sending those materials in exchange for an Amazon gift card or a new iPhone or a place to sleep that night, that is human trafficking. And whoever is providing that gift or that money, that item of value to the minor is the trafficker. So a really important thing to note about this caveat to the TVPA with all minors being considered victims of trafficking without force, fraud, or coercion is that a lot of times there are minors who have been traumatized, right? There are problems at home, maybe there's violence at home, maybe they've been abused in one way or another. And if they are not given the tools to overcome that trauma, then they are going to act out in school. Maybe that looks like truancy, substance abuse, starting fights on campus. And so when, you know, the school resource officer is called, or, you know, some other law enforcement, they see that behavior as this kid is out of control. They need to be punished. They need to get out of here. But when that child is incarcerated or punished, then they get additional trauma instead of getting the tools to cope with that trauma. And so a lot of times when these minors, you know, maybe they were exchanging sex for something of value, and they've been trained to believe that they are there by choice. They've been trained to be loyal to that trafficker. So when law enforcement comes in and they say, I want to be out here, you know, my trafficker loves me, that's my daddy. Then they get incarcerated and charged with prostitution, even though they are protected under this federal law. So here in Houston, we have an automatic diversion programs that if a youth is, you know, arrested and found to be engaging in a commercial sex act, they're automatically redirected to supportive services. But I don't know if y'all have similar programs in other parts of Texas. Y'all don't? Okay, well, that's good to know, at least. But yeah, so it is important to know, especially if you have school resource officers on campus or some kind of law enforcement that you work with your school, that they know about the definition of the TVPA, and you can make sure that your students are getting access to those supportive services. Okay, so let's take a look at statistics. And it's impossible to know exactly how many people are trafficked because, as we saw in this AMP definition, people may believe that it's their choice to be there. And these kind of subtle psychological situations that happen, people may not identify as victims. They may not recognize that what's happening to them is trafficking. That being said, there was a really definitive study done by the International Labor Organization in 2017, and they estimated that there are around 25 million victims of human trafficking globally. And that number jumps to 40 million when we include forced marriage. In terms of gender, they did use the gender binary in this study and found that about 55% of victims are women and 45% are men. Other agencies have found that female victims account for 60 to 90%. So we know that women are more affected by human trafficking, but we also know that men and boys are less likely to be identified as victims and less likely to report. In terms of age, about 26% of victims are children and 74% are adults. So again, talking about our kind of collective imagination about human trafficking, right? We usually automatically picture women and children as victims of sex trafficking. But the reality is that labor trafficking accounts for about twice as much as sex trafficking. When we know that men and gender minorities are affected and adults tend to be more affected by trafficking. Here in Texas, we had a really groundbreaking study done by UT Austin, and they estimated that there are around 313,000 victims of trafficking here in Texas alone. 79,000 of those are minor victims of sex trafficking, and 234,000 are victims of labor trafficking. So this is huge. We know that human trafficking is a huge problem here in Texas. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I'm sure y'all can guess, you know, we're close to the border. There's a lot of airports, seaports, roadways. It's very, you know, international, a lot of people going through Texas. So we know that Texas is a hub for human trafficking, unfortunately. These are some of the crimes that are really frequently confused with human trafficking that I just wanted to take some time to clear up. So smuggling and trafficking, we do hear these words used interchangeably, but they're distinctly different. Human smuggling is when somebody pays for a service to be transported over a border. The commodity being bought and sold is transportation, and it's a crime against a border. But when it comes to trafficking, even though this word trafficking implies movement, someone can be trafficked out of their own community, out of their own home. The commodity being bought and sold is a person's body or their labor, and it's a crime against that person's human rights. Hostage taking and kidnapping, again, our mind kind of automatically goes to human trafficking. You know, this person's been kidnapped, they're going to be trafficked. But the truth is that kidnapping is really an extreme minority of cases of trafficking. In my 12 years of hearing survivors tell their stories, I have never heard of somebody being kidnapped off of the street. to be trafficked. The one story I heard about somebody being kidnapped at all was in the Texas Attorney General's video, Be the One to Stop Human Trafficking. They do speak with a survivor who visited a home of somebody with a friend, and then those individuals kidnapped her when she went to that home. So that has happened. But as far as being kidnapped off the street, I've never heard of that happening. So hopefully that helps to put some people's minds at ease. In terms of prostitution, it's, you know, this distinction between prostitution and sex trafficking. So we really define prostitution as when both parties are over the age of 18. There's no such thing as a child prostitute or a teen prostitute. So the two parties are over 18, it's consensual and only between the two of them, the buyer of sex and the seller of sex. Whenever we have a third person who is collecting the money, mitigating the transaction, has any part of that, that person is a trafficker. A pimp and a sex trafficker are the exact same thing. And when we've worked alongside our law enforcement partners, they've said that almost every time that they have arrested somebody for prostitution or done some kind of sting or investigation, they found that there is pretty much always a trafficker. And if a trafficker is present, there's pretty much always a case of force, fraud, or coercion. The victim may not realize that. You know, they may have just seen it as like, oh yeah, this person was a lot nicer to me in the beginning, but at least they're still taking care of me to some degree. But as outsiders, you know, service providers, teachers, educators, we can see from that outside perspective that that person has been manipulated into that situation. Child abuse and domestic violence are, again, distinctly different from trafficking, but somebody who experiences domestic violence, child abuse, and especially child sexual assault can be at a higher risk of being trafficked later. And wage theft can be present. That definitely constitutes labor exploitation. But again, we need to prove the action and means of control in order for it to qualify as trafficking. So let's talk more about child trafficking specifically, since y'all are educators working in schools. So where does child trafficking happen? We've seen, I want to say the majority of cases, but I don't have statistics to back that up. It's really just my experience hearing law enforcement talk about investigations where a child has gone missing. A lot of times when they find the child, they find them a few weeks later in a hotel or a motel being trafficked. That's probably the biggest venue that we see. It also happens street prostitution and truck stops. It can happen in personal homes. Traveling sales crews, as I mentioned, they really prey on youth because, you know, those youth are naive and don't know what to look for in order to get a job, and the traffickers prey on that naivete. The internet definitely happens, even though the FOSTA-SESTA Act took down Backpage.com and held internet companies responsible for the, you know, content that was on their site. We still see people being advertised for commercial sex all over the internet on sites like Craigslist. There's a bunch of other websites. And these websites, they will create ads specifically highlighting the, it always makes me sick to talk about this, but like the youth of, like the youngness of those victims, like they'll advertise that as a selling point for their victims. And we also see cases of domestic labor, you know, kids being used for, you know, childcare or housekeeping and under labor trafficking conditions. So how do traffickers recruit victims? The most common methods that we see are seduction and coercion. You know, it's known as Romeo pimping. They'll date them or use that coercion, use that form of leverage over their victim. But we also see false advertising for modeling jobs, acting jobs, especially when they, you know, post this job advertisement with, you know, no experience required and no information about the company that the person can look up. It's usually a front for something else. We also see peer recruitment. Sometimes traffickers, get such complete control over their victims that they feel they can send those victims into their community, their school, even, their faith-based group, and get other people involved in that scheme. It might be a young person who believes that this is, their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their partner, trying to use that gender neutral language, who's like, hey, I'm having a party this weekend and I'm going to have some guys come down. I need you to get more people to come to this party. And if you get them, then I'll give you, a gift or a treat, or I won't beat you tonight, that kind of carrot and the stick kind of thing. And they'll get other young people involved in these trafficking schemes. Recruitment agencies, we tend to see this more with labor trafficking, especially in construction, agriculture, and the hospitality industry, where they need to fill a larger labor need. And the parent companies may not even know that they're using labor trafficking. Social media is huge with minors involved in sex trafficking. So social media is a really powerful tool for traffickers for two reasons. The first is that young people nowadays, their psyche is enmeshed in social media. We definitely see this a lot with our young people, right? And these kids are posting on their social media saying, I feel lonely, I'm depressed, I feel ugly, my parents lost their job and I need money. Does anybody have an after school job that I can get? And so they're posting their vulnerabilities on social media, and traffickers see all of that as, big, flashing lights saying, I'm vulnerable and I'm looking for somebody to come talk to me and make me feel good. And social media also allows for this direct messaging capability. So anybody can message these kids directly on a bunch of different platforms and say, hey, I think you're beautiful. I care about you. Your parents don't care about you. I have a way that you can make a ton of money super easily. And they'll start to groom those usually young people through social media over a period of time until they trust them and, meet up in person. And then the trafficking starts. And that's not to say, we have had victims say that they never even met their trafficker. All of the trafficking occurred via social media, via the internet. So it is possible to do that. We have seen cases of parents selling their own children. We also see violence enforcing kidnapping, but we see these the least frequently. So this is kind of in order from the most frequent methods of recruitment to the least. So I want to do an activity with everybody if you guys want to unmute yourselves. So I'm going to click through some pictures and I want you to tell me if you think this person is a trafficker, a victim, or a buyer. So trafficker, victim, or buyer? Buyer, okay.
Buyer.
This guy?
Trafficker. Trafficker.
And this guy over here?
Trafficker.
Trafficker, buyer. And this guy?
Buyer.
Trafficker.
Buyer, trafficker. This girl right here?
Trafficker. Trafficker.
Dang, you guys have seen some. Okay. And this lady?
Oh, trafficker buyer. Yeah.
Trafficker buyer. Okay. Well, I tried to shame y'all, but
think they're all guilty.
You're right. They're all traffickers. You were wise to my tricks. So I'm going to tell you each of their stories. They can be really graphic. So if this is already feeling really heavy for you and you're like, I do not need to hear these stories to get it, you can mute me. I totally, encourage that if you just need to take some self-care breaths and check in with yourself. So this lady on the top left is Antoinette Davis. She trafficked her 5-year-old daughter to pay off a $200 drug debt. And unfortunately, this was something that her child did not survive. The man in the top middle is Gerardo Salazar. He was also known as El Gallo. He would date these young women from Mexico, or he was from Mexico. He would date these young women there, get to know their families. They would fall in love with him, and he would convince them to move up to Houston with him to start a new life. Once they had moved up to Houston with him, he had them branded with a rooster tattoo and coerced them into performing commercial sex acts by threatening the lives of their families back home. The man on the top right is Andrew Fields, and he was a drug dealer who realized that he could use drugs to control people. So he got these young women addicted to really heavy substances, morphine, Dilaudid, and there was a third one, and intentionally gave them really high doses of these narcotics so that they became heavily addicted. And then he would withhold their next fix of these drugs until they performed sex acts on him and on clients. And it was only after they had performed these sex acts that they were given the drugs so they could stave off dope sickness that he had put into them. The man on the bottom left is Andras Voss. He and two other men went to Hungary to recruit these young men. They said, we have a great job opportunity for you in the United States. We'll, pay for all of your stuff. You'll make a great wage, send money home to your family, whatever you need. It's a great opportunity. And when they brought the men over to the United States, they were forced to commit sex acts 20 hours a day, barely given enough food and sleep to stay alive. And they were trafficked between New York and Miami. The girl in the bottom middle is the one that usually surprises people, but it did not surprise y'all. You've seen too many things, I guess. So this girl's Montia Parker. She was 18 years old, captain of her cheerleading squad, straight A student, taking college classes. And she convinced her 16-year-old classmate with a learning disability to sell her body as a way of earning money for college and to get money to buy herself nice things. She would take the girl out of school to go out on dates, which is a term in sex trafficking for an in-person commercial sex act. And she kept the money that the girl earned. Montia Parker was found out because the school called the mom of the trafficked girl and said, like, hey, there's this unexplained absence. And the mom was like, that's weird. She shouldn't have been absent that day. Took her to school. So she went through her daughter's phone and saw that Montia had been grooming her over the course of weeks and months into commercial sex. The woman on the bottom right is Hortensia Medelas Arguello, also known as Tensha. She operated several successful cantinas in the greater Houston area. And at the time, and the cantinas were fronts for brothels. At the time that she was arrested, her youngest victim was her 14-year-old granddaughter. So if you were to ask me, well, what's the profile of a trafficker, right? It's going to be a guy in his 20s or 30s with his pants around his ankle or around his knees, right? But there is no demographic profile of a trafficker. It can be anybody, regardless of age, gender, race, any of that. And and the other thing to note is that these people had a relationship to their victim: mother, boyfriend, drug dealer, employer, classmate, grandmother. These are people that their victims knew and trusted, maybe even loved, and the traffickers manipulated that connection for the purpose of exploiting that person for their own personal financial gain. So y'all might be familiar with Covenant House. It's an international nonprofit that provides housing and supportive services to youth. And they asked their clients who were female survivors of sex trafficking, what was your relationship to your trafficker? 36% said that they were trafficked by immediate family members. That is parents, grandparents, and siblings. 27% were trafficked by a boyfriend, 14% friends of family, 14% employers, and only 9% were trafficked by strangers. So this really illustrates that, especially when it comes to youth, they are much more likely to be trafficked by somebody that they know and somebody that they are close with, as opposed to some stranger who just manages to abduct them from a location. So let's look at some of the risk factors and red flags for trafficking. Anybody can be trafficked regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status. I've heard stories of people who had all of the, psychosocial support that they could possibly need and simply trusted the wrong person. That being said, there are certain risks that can cause somebody to be more vulnerable to human trafficking. So is everybody familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? Yes. No. Should I explain it? I'll explain
Yes,
it.
please.
Okay, that's really fun. So the ACE study was a study done in the mid-90s by Kaiser Permanente out of Southern California, and it was expanded by the CDC. And basically what the ACE study found is that when children are exposed to adverse childhood experiences, the more of those adverse childhood experiences they have, the more likely they are to have adverse health effects later in life. So it's 10 ACEs in total. I feel like most people have at least one or two. I have 3. I feel like a lot of them are pretty common. Things like single parent household, not having enough food, having a parent with a mental illness or a parent that's been incarcerated. A lot of different indicators of not having the social needs met and the physical needs met. But the more of those a person has, the more likely they are to be at risk for things like heart disease, diabetes, substance abuse, smoking cigarettes, all of those kinds of things, especially when somebody has 4 or more. And in studies that have asked survivors what their ACE score was, most of them had 6 or more ACEs. The most common one that they all had in common was childhood sexual abuse. So these studies are showing that childhood sexual abuse is the most common indicator of, risk for sex trafficking. So essentially, it's all very doom and gloom when we look at the ACE study. And if you're interested, you can go to cdc.gov and look up ACEs and find out more. A lot of it kind of ties into these social determinants of health and how, we know that people in certain communities are at a higher risk for ACEs. And so we can kind of intervene and know, okay, if this person isn't getting the support that they need at home to develop properly, how can we as educators or, counselors, other people who work in schools, meet those needs of that child so that we can prevent these adverse health effects later in life, including trafficking. So some of these relationship risk factors, family dysfunction, disruption. If somebody has an unstable home environment, then they are going to be desperate to have that sense of belonging, of being taken care of. And that is what the trafficker will offer on a silver platter. They'll say, I can provide you with a family, with a home. I can make sure that you never want for anything. I'll take care of all that. And then once that person relies on that trafficker for everything, then of course it turns into trafficking. If there is a history of child abuse, neglect, or mistreatment, especially if somebody experiences violence or they witness violence, then a child will normalize violence in the context of relationships, especially romantic relationships, right? They saw domestic violence in the home. They think if somebody loves you, they hurt you. That's just a part of it. So if they end up in a relationship with somebody who is violent towards them, they sort of normalize that. And that may even be a comfortable space for somebody who grew up in that environment. That's the norm for them. If somebody is homeless, they've run away, or they've been thrown out of the home, maybe because of their gender or sexual identity, then they need to have those basic needs met. And again, the trafficker will offer those basic needs. Being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning in itself isn't a risk factor, but it's when the family or the school or those other support systems that are in place to take care of youth deny the validity of somebody's gender or sexual expression, then that youth loses confidence in themselves. They are at additional risk for violence and trauma because they are struggling with who they are and they're not getting the support to build confidence within themselves. And traffickers, again, will come and say, you know, I love you for exactly who you are. I support you in all of this. And your teachers and your parents don't care about you because they're saying these terrible things about you. So if you come live with me, you can live however you want to live. Being involved in systems like the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, all of this ties together, and I'm sure that you guys are already seeing these connections, right? When children go through trauma, they don't get the tools to process trauma, they act out, they go through the foster care system where they may not get the support that they need, or they end up in the juvenile justice system where, you know, trauma is treated as bad behavior and punished. A student who has a disability, you know, people with disabilities have the same needs as neurotypical people, to want a relationship, to be independent. And again, traffickers are going to prey on those needs and present those in exchange for that exploitation. On a societal level, there's a lack of awareness of what human trafficking is. If everybody thinks that human trafficking is being kidnapped, then they're not going to look out for that person who is being really flirtatious and nice and sending them lots of gifts. Lack of resources means that the trafficker can offer those resources to somebody. And this is a really weird point for me to make, because I think that everybody really makes decisions about what they choose to watch and the actions that they make. Everybody sort of has that power. And so people have a choice whether or not to watch, you know, children in sexual situations, or watch, you know, pornography where a woman is being brutalized. We have those decisions that we can make. But it is also a valid argument that within our media and our culture, there is a sexualization of youth and children, and this glamorization of violence against women. And when we normalize things like that, then it drives the demand for trafficking. On a community level, there might be pressure to be sexually active, to be part of a gang, to try drugs, to be in a relationship. And all of those can influence somebody into trafficking. So the good news is that, you know, as teachers and those who work in schools, you get to know your students and you're able to see these risk factors and intervene on their behalf. So if you know that a student is not getting what they need from home in terms of love, food, community support, any of that, then, you know, talk with your counselors and figure out how you can meet those physical and psychosocial needs for that child. And I know we're getting towards the end. I only have 10 minutes left. I have some human trafficking lesson plans that I'm going to give you for all ages. So if you want to teach your kids about human trafficking, that can be a really helpful way for them to learn it and sort of internalize that. Help students gain confidence. Low self-esteem and social isolation are the #1 things that traffickers look for when they are selecting a victim. And creating this environment where people of all different gender and sexual identities feel welcomed and accepted and loved and supported in the classroom and school environment. All right, let's get into the red flags. So some physical red flags: security that's meant to keep people inside, things like locks on the outside of doors, an unusual amount of physical security, security cameras trained on employees, living in the same place where they work, a large number of occupancy in a smaller living space, restricted or controlled communication. You know, maybe you're asking your student questions and they say, you know, oh, I can't say that, or I have to ask my parent, or I have to ask my guardian. You know, that's a red flag, especially if it's something that they should be able to answer for themselves. Or if they mention being Or if they mention frequent movement, maybe they were out of school for a week and they said, oh, well, my parent took me to a bunch of different cities last week. That's a red flag for trafficking. As we've seen, with Antoinette Davis and Hortensia Medeles, parents traffic their children. They absolutely do, and it happens, and we need to be aware of that. Some physical red flags are branding tattoos or scars. El Gallo used that rooster tattoo, especially in a school, kids under 18, there's no reason for them to have a tattoo, right? So if they do have a tattoo, that's definitely a red flag. Why does this young person already have a tattoo? Especially if it's something that says property of so-and-so, something that indicates property ownership, making money, any of that. Signs of physical or sexual abuse, signs of neglect, injuries without explanation, things like bruises in multiple stages of healing, poor hygiene, body odor, all of these things that indicate that somebody isn't getting what they need at home or they're being withheld from some basic need. Behavioral red flags, inconsistencies in story. A lot of times the trafficker will give their victim a script to follow. They'll say, if anybody asks you where you were last week, you'll say that we went on a family vacation. And they will drill that story into their victim and practice it so that it's like a script. So if you're hearing from a student something that isn't quite adding up or sounds like a script, that could be what it is. Changes in academic performance, traffickers may allow their victims to continue going to school, but if you notice them falling asleep in class or not being interested in things they were once really interested in, those are all red flags. A controlling presence is huge. Uncharacteristic promiscuity. And I know that kids, especially when they're in high school or even middle school, they'll start being kind of sexual because they're trying to figure out that whole world. And so, but as a teacher, what's normal for that age group. And if you see something that's out of the norm, then you can kind of say, this isn't the norm. This is a little bit unusual. Traffickers will really drill into their victims. This is who you are. You are a sexual person. You should be using your body to make money. Or if they're lying about their age. And I know it's pretty hard to lie about their age if they have to register for school and provide some kind of proof of their age. But we have had cases of traffickers who enroll in school under a false name and age for the purpose of recruiting victims. So that can happen as well. Some social indicators: having a significant other that is way older. There is no reason that a child in school should be dating somebody 10 years older than them. That's a huge red flag. Abusive home environment, a history of running away or homelessness, an overly sexual online profile. If they reference sexual terms that are beyond normal for their age group, things like the life, stable, daddy, John, trick, the track, or the blade. And that vernacular is evolving all the time. So if your students are using these terms and you're like, what does that even mean? They might be terms for sex trafficking, or they express a need to pay off a debt. There's no reason that a student in K through 12 should have any debt yet. So if they're mentioning like, I have to go home, I have a debt to pay off, that's a big red flag. We kind of already mentioned these: uncharacteristic promiscuity, academic performance, bouncing between schools, falling asleep in class, being academically unengaged. Just, as you sort of know the baseline for your students, you recognize what's a variance from that baseline. And it's the same with working with students with disabilities. As you get to know them, what they enjoy, what they're good at, what those measures are for them learning and developing skills. So if you notice a variance from that, they have new behaviors that are disruptive or attention seeking. There's a skill that they were previously developing and suddenly there's a decline in that development. That can indicate that something has changed in their lives and maybe they don't know how to express that, or they're scared to express that. The trafficker may have said, if you tell anybody I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to hurt your family, whatever that case may be. A lack of energy or pleasure in things they used to enjoy, excessive fear, questions about sexuality or reproduction are all red flags for students with disabilities. Okay, so can we go over 7? Is that okay with everybody? I'm so sorry. I should have been more succinct in my words. Is that okay?
I think you're okay, Sarah.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I tend to be a bit long-winded sometimes because there's just so much to talk about, honestly, and I want to make sure to give everybody as much information as I can. So let's say you recognize these red flags for trafficking. What do you do? So it's really important to create a protocol within your school where if you recognize trafficking, what do you do so that everybody knows exactly what the protocol is. And I have given some resources to Jamie to send out to everybody. They should be in the chat of how to create a protocol within your school, and then a 1-pager for just like a really brief, if you recognize trafficking, here are questions you can ask, here's what you can do. So let's dive into that. We want to do a safety check. Is the student safe at school? We have heard stories of teachers, counselors, coaches who traffic their students. So maybe the student isn't safe at school and they're safer at home, or they need to be taken to another location. Are there trafficking indicators that are present? What are the indicators that we are seeing? Involve the school resource officers as appropriate. And I say as appropriate because some of you mentioned that you don't have those same protections where law enforcement knows that caveat to the TVPA. So if you do have a student who is coping with trauma and has these trauma-informed behaviors, it might not be appropriate to involve the school resource officer. But if your school resource officers have been trained in human trafficking, in trauma-informed care and things like that, then it may be best to get them involved because they have that law enforcement power and connection. If you think that your student or a staff member is in immediate danger, do call 911. We do need to, it is required to file a report with DFPS within 48 hours, because if we suspect trafficking, then we are suspecting child abuse. So in addition to that requirement of contacting DFPS within 48 hours, we also recommend calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And then, connecting with your counselors, finding out what are the resources that we can offer our students. We address this trafficking situation, but there's still a homelessness issue or a substance abuse issue. Let's make sure that that student is supported with these different social services. Some things to remember. So if a student does disclose to you that they are being trafficked, that was an incredibly brave thing that they did, and we really want to honor that. So make sure that you and the victim are safe and remain calm, even if you're terrified, you have no idea what to do. It's likely that the student was really scared about telling you this information. So if you can be calm, then they can mirror your body language and it can help them to remain calm, right? You're the adult, you're kind of setting the tone for this interaction. Validate that they did the right thing by telling you. It's likely that, maybe the trafficker threatened them or a family member if they told somebody. So it can be validating to hear that it was good that they told an authority figure. Don't make promises. We can't promise that that trafficker is going to be put away forever and never going to hurt you again. We can't promise somebody, you're going to be safe and everything's going to be okay. And they've likely had promises made to them before by the trafficker, by family members, and those promises were broken. So if you make promises that you can't keep, then it's just going to make it harder for them to trust you or others in the future. So if the child tells you their story, provide them with a safe space to tell that story, but don't ask additional questions or or push them, it's really best to get a forensic interviewer to come in, because every time a child tells, or anybody tells their traumatic story, they run the risk of being re-traumatized. So we want to minimize that risk of re-traumatizing them by not additionally questioning them. Don't confront the suspected trafficker. Traffickers are dangerous people, and they are master manipulators. That is one thing that they all have in common. They are smooth talkers. They are charming. They will say whatever they need to say to get out of trouble and get people on their side. And then follow with your reporting requirements. So we've kind of been talking about this all along, but just to be really clear about it, kids who have been trafficked have been traumatized. Maybe this happened over the course of a week. Maybe this has been going on their entire lives. And so they may exhibit symptoms of trauma and coping mechanisms that make it seem like they're not a victim, they're just a bad kid, or they're just a tough kid. And that can mean that they're loyal to the pimp. Maybe this is somebody that, you know, this person cares about me. You know, this is my daddy and he takes care of all my basic needs. And I'm not going to let anything bad happen to them, even if this person has been exploiting them and abusing them. We've, you know, especially when these youth are forcibly separated from their trafficker, relapse and running back to the trafficker is the norm, unfortunately, because they've bonded with that trafficker. They believe that this person cares about them. So if they don't have the tools to undo that psychological manipulation and undo the trauma bonding that has occurred, then they're going to continue to have that strong bond with the trafficker, and they're going to run right back to them. They may lie to you or to other service providers because that's how they've survived up to this point. Again, promises have been broken, so trust is hard to come by. They may be aggressive or defensive. They might glamorize their exploitation. They might say, you know, my partner, you know, took me to Vegas and bought me all of these nice things, and I got my hair and makeup done, and I was, you know, treated like a celebrity, when really they were being exploited and they're not able to see that. Or some level of sexual confusion. You know, again, the trafficker telling them they are a sexual person, that's who they are, and they should be making money off of it. So to respond to that, just be non-judgmental and empathetic, even if this young person is bragging about doing drugs and engaging in commercial sex. If they think that you are judging them, then they are automatically going to shut down or get defensive. So if you can show them, you know, I care about you, you know, I just want the best for you, you know, there are some resources I want to share with you, in that sort of kind, compassionate tone, they may be more willing to listen to you and open up about what's really going on. And we want to treat the youth as a survivor of trauma and abuse. So the youth might not recognize their situation as exploitative. They may not think that they need to be rescued or, you know, taken out of their situation. Or they might, you know, maybe this is familial trafficking and they go to school every day thinking, God, I hope today is the day that a teacher asks me what's wrong and I can get this off my chest. These trafficking situations are very varied and different. So we have to recognize that it may look different for, you know, the different students that we have. Our duty to report, the Texas Family Code means reporting to DFPS within 48 hours. And this is a Houston number. So if anybody is in Houston, you can utilize this number. If you're outside of Houston, you can probably Google FBI Innocence Lost and the name of your community, and you may get the direct line for that law enforcement body that specifically deals in child trafficking. So this is probably the best resource that I can give you. This is the Human Trafficking Hotline. You can call this hotline anytime, 24/7. It's not an emergency number, so they can help you figure out if this is trafficking. If you know it's trafficking, they can help you figure out the next steps. You can also have this maybe in your classroom or in your counseling office, with self-identification questions, that if a youth, you know, doesn't realize what's happening to them, and then they read from this poster, you know, is somebody doing something that makes you feel uncomfortable? Is somebody profiting off of you? You know, did somebody present a situation and now it's very different? They may be able to self-identify and call this number for themselves. These are some of the Houston providers. So this is what's available in Houston. If you go to the toolkit, I think I have some other resources in case you're outside of the Houston area. Another way that you can find out the local resources, if you go to humantraffickinghotline.org, they have a directory of victim services. And I do have a link to that in the toolkits, so you can find out the resources that are local to your area. But an example of these resources that we have out here, we have case management for all victims. We have case management that is more specific to immigrant or foreign national victims. So if somebody, you know, doesn't want to disclose because their parents are, you know, here without documentation and they don't want their parents to get deported, we have certain law or legal agencies that really specialize in that area. We have Rescue Houston. It's a 24/7 hotline where anybody can call if they're being trafficked and be picked up within an hour or two and connected with care and services. We have the Houston Area Women's Center, so I'm sure that you have a local women's shelter that offers domestic violence, sexual assault, as well as children's court services. You know, there's usually, so here in Houston, and I don't know if this is Texas-wide or Houston specific, but we have Triad, and that is like the intersection of law enforcement, social services, and juvenile probation to identify trafficking and get them connected to the right services. And it's likely that there are shelters in your area as well. Covenant House, I need to fix this, it's 18 to 24, and then Montrose Grace Place. But, you know, if you do know of a young person who is in need of placement, they may be willing to relocate to Houston to get access to a shelter. Okay, sorry I went over time. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask, or are you all super checked out, ready to like have dinner and be done with your workday? No questions? Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you all so much for...
Hey, Sarah, can you hear me? This is Catherine. Hi. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for presenting this. I know this is really hard information to present. I can't imagine. So thank you, because it's so important. Mine may be more of a comment than a question. I guess throughout this, I was just starting to wonder, you know, are organizations like yours and others that are really focused on the human trafficking issue, I would love to see you all lobby legislators for action regarding counselors in schools. You know, I do not blame our counselors in our schools at all, but I know as a former elementary classroom teacher, so many students that I had needed actual counseling and never received it from the counselors at school because they were strictly directed to focus on testing and standardized testing, you know, for the state and all these different TEA guidelines. And I think, you know, when kids who aren't victims of human trafficking aren't getting those regular lessons from counselors on what to look for and how to trust people and things like that, then they get to middle school and high school and they're even more likely to be those victims because we've been using our counselors as testing coordinators. So I just know our organization, AFT, we really, you know, we want to work towards that, and it's so hard. So I think if organizations like yours could kind of try to focus on that legislatively, that's just one, you know, little piece of the puzzle that could help in the big picture. But I really do appreciate all of you so much, because like I said, this is just, it's a topic no one wants to talk about or hear about, but it's got to be discussed. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Catherine, thank you so much for your kind words and for pointing out that extremely important piece. You are right. Legislative action and advocacy is really, really key on this. So as part of our Houston Rescue and Restore Coalition, we have a legal advocacy committee that is led by Children at Risk. So Children at Risk, I don't know if they're statewide or Houston specific, but they are the main organization that does, you know, lobbying and legislative action and advocacy, and kind of doing all of the research that no one really wants to do, and then mobilizing people like, we've done the research, this is the action that we need to take, let's lobby. So we are involved with them that way. And then there was a piece of legislation known as the McKinney-Vento Act, and I included some information on that in your toolkit. And despite my political science degree, I'm not a super legally person, but my understanding of the McKinney-Vento Act is that there needs to be a counselor in the school that is focused on social services for students, especially ones that are homeless. So this doesn't directly speak to what you were talking about, because you're right, students do need education about violence, about safety, about healthy relationships. You know, this unfortunately is not part of the curriculum, but it is some of the most critical knowledge that they can get. So I don't know if McKinney-Vento covers that, but I do believe that it covers like the basics of making sure that students at least aren't homeless and have their basic needs met. So I did include some information on that in the toolkit. And I mean, I'm, you know, plugged into Children at Risk and their advocacy day. I am learning more about, you know, some of the local laws here in Texas and how, you know, somehow they are all different in the different parts of Texas. I also included some information on the governor's child sex trafficking team, so that might have more legislative information. But I definitely want to thank you for bringing that up. You are so right. We need to be advocating for these kids. Legislative action is definitely a part of it. You're absolutely right. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Sarah. Great job.
Thank you.
And I just launched a poll, the evaluation. So if you haven't had a chance to take it, please answer those questions. We actually do look at them, and that helps us frame our future trainings. But Nikki, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was jumping ahead maybe a little bit, Jamie. So I was looking over the evaluation. And Sarah, my name's Nikki Cowart. I'm not a classroom teacher. I'm in the union office full-time. You know, I'm the local president here in Cy-Fair. We're the third largest district in the state. And unfortunately, we are in a, you know, like most teachers, we're in this wonky hybrid model. I just want to say, and looking over the evaluation, number 4, talking about, you know, will this help teachers with their virtual teaching and keeping students engaged? Talking about how timely this is. Twice this week, and it's only, you know, what is today? Wednesday. I've been contacted by union members that have seen things on the other side of their Zoom camera that very alarming for them. They do not have the tools in the tool bag. In fact, one member was so, used the word tonight several times, traumatized, when she reached out to her campus administration to, you know, chime in, to contact the guardian on what was seen. The principal immediately put it back on her and said, oh, I'm sure the parent wasn't aware that the camera view was on. And so anyway, just talking about how timely this is to what we're all seeing on these, whether you are, you know, in the hybrid model or virtual. Yeah, I mean, and I've been doing this work for, gosh, 15 years. Never have I received this many multiple calls that there is a guardian walking around in the background with only bra and panties on, or one middle school teacher demanded that the little girl, the student, she was like, turn your camera back on and the microphone right now, only to hear like an eruption of adults in the room screaming. The child was crying, you know, so the teacher felt god awful for demanding. Anyway, so I just want to say this was very helpful tonight. And, you know, I have a hand cramp now. I was taking in as many notes as I can. So we might have to have you come back and do something Sci-Fair specific. Because like I said, my teachers that aren't used to this virtual design of teaching, it's very alarming. Some of them, you know, what they're seeing on the other end.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can't even imagine, like, I talk about these situations and I hear survivor stories, but still when I hear things about, you know, kids being in an environment where the parents are screaming and parents are, you know, walking around naked for all of the students to see is horrifying. And maybe there is a silver lining in that, you know, teachers are able to recognize their students' home lives better than they would in the classroom and be able to make those reports. But it's definitely super stressful for everybody. So yeah, thank you for having me. Of course, I'm more than happy to give this training to your specific school, your school district, your counselors, whoever wants it. You know, I'm more than happy to do so.
And I will email the handouts that Sarah sent me when I email you your CPE certificate. And I also will include Sarah's information so that if you feel like it's something that your district needs to look into to hosting and get this information to teachers, I think it is very, very important. And I think in this virtual setting, teachers are eyes are really being open to what is going on in homes. And as Sarah said, it's not people snatching people up off the street. It's usually someone that you know. And I love to watch documentaries, but during this pandemic, I've watched a lot of documentaries, but something like the one of the NXIVM, like it's not just people living in poverty. It's wealthy people who are being manipulated into human trafficking. And it's just like, wow, these are like well-educated, successful people who were just brainwashed and manipulated and tattooed. And then I watched the thing on the, you know, Epstein, and it's just like how he manipulated young women to go and recruit other girls in the school. And yeah, so it happens right underneath our nose and we don't even know. But Sarah, thank you so much. And I will get all this information to you all so that you'll know who to follow up with, and you will have those tips and tricks and all of that great stuff. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add? Otherwise, we won't have a session next Wednesday, but on December the 2nd, we're going to bring Radula back to do a 1-hour meditation for us. So next month, we're going to be focusing on mental health of our members and educators across the state. So there will be meditation. And then the next week, we're going to do like the self-care plan, which I'm personally looking forward to. I feel like I need to get some kind of plan in place. And then we will have another session of meditation. So be sure to check the Bridges Institute for Professional Development Facebook page, because Hannah and I, that's where we create all of our events and share them. Please share them across your social media platforms so more people know that we're doing all of this. Other than that, thank you so much, and we will see you all at the next session.